I entered the company in 2017. We can come back to my story later. At that point in time, myself and Mass, our CEO, and Thomas, our third co-founder, got the opportunity to buy back all the shares from the original founders. So we did that and sort of restarted the company as SynergyXR, took over the entire team and all of our history and all of the experience, but also some of the learnings. So we've done custom built, especially a lot of like VR-based training applications, but also like remote support applications on both the HoloLens and iPad, stuff like that. But every time it was custom built and it got very, very expensive and it got like quite hard. Like the end users, they wanted to, okay, now we have a slight shift in this procedure. Can you just do this minor change? And well, we had to open the project and do the change and do quality assurance and deploy it and stuff like that. So everything took a lot of time and cost a lot of money. So we saw sort of a gap in the market for a platform enabling end users to create these experiences on their own and edit existing training experiences. So that's what we set out. In 2018 was where we really started developing what is today the SynergyXR platform.
I'm MetaRick!
Welcome back to another episode of MetaRick, where we talk with innovative industry leaders, creative technologists, brand leaders, and founders of agencies and startups to talk about spatial computing, artificial intelligence, and cutting-edge technologies. We tend to like to lean into some questions around go-to-market and the business side of things, but also love to hear founder stories. Today, we've got Sune. Sune is here from SynergyXR. He's their CTO. He's got an incredible background with a PhD in computer science, modeling and simulation of complex systems. He has applied research background in military domains, so radar systems and autonomous surveillance systems, and over a decade with XR technologies in an industrial and kind of enterprise setting. Sune, it's awesome to have you on the show. I'm really excited to learn more about SynergyXR. It seems like you guys have been around the space for quite a while now. I think the company started in like 2008. Maybe you could give us a little background for what SynergyXR is and kind of how the company started.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me. Looking forward to this chat. So SynergyXR actually has quite a substantial history. They started way back in 2008, as you mentioned, under another name. So back then it was called Unity Studios. It was originally founded by the founders of Unity Technologies. So like David and Joachim and Nicholas. And that was way back when like there were less than 20 people employed in Unity Technologies. And they were in need of a sort of consultancy company that could help game companies start using their engine once it was starting like picking up pace. So they hired a team here in Aarhus, and this was way before I even entered the company. So originally we've been like in the consultancy business helping out, especially on the gaming side, but we very quickly started getting like more B2B enterprise kind of customers that saw the benefits of real-time rendering for like marketing, sales purpose, stuff like that, interesting like installations. So we've done some interesting stuff for Procter & Gamble and Microsoft and Google and Major League Baseball. We've done a lot of stuff throughout the years. At a certain point, there was a shift in management. So our current CEO was promoted to CEO and took over management of the company. And he sort of cut away all the gaming stuff because he could see where the main business potential was in the B2B side of things. And that was also like back in the DK1 days, Oculus DK1. So he really took on XR, VR. He also ran around with the very first AR capable tablets and stuff like that, and started getting a lot of traction on that. I entered the company in 2017. We can come back to my story later. At that point in time, myself and Mass, our CEO, and Thomas, our third co-founder, got the opportunity to buy back all the shares from the original founders. So we did that and sort of restarted the company as SynergyXR, took over the entire team and all of our history and all of the experience, but also some of the learnings. So we've done custom built, especially a lot of like VR based training applications, but also like remote support applications on both the HoloLens and iPad, stuff like that. But every time it was custom built and it got very, very expensive and it got like quite hard. Like the end users, they wanted to, okay, now we have a slight shift in this procedure. Can you just do this minor change? And well, we had to open the project and do the change and do quality assurance and deploy it and stuff like that. So everything took a lot of time and cost a lot of money. So we saw sort of a gap in the market for a platform enabling end users to create these experiences on their own and edit existing training experiences. So that's what we set out in 2018 was where we really started developing what is today the SynergyXR platform. We bootstrapped it for 2 years, so until 2020, we poured all our own funding into the development of the platform while we're still doing custom development on the side. And in the summer of 2020, we started our venture journey. So we got the first bunch of investors on, and we just raised our third round here in the spring. So things are progressing quite nicely there as well. So that's very, very quickly about the story about company.
That's very exciting, and congratulations on the move into raising some funding. I'm sure going through bootstrapping is always incredibly stressful, and being able to have that reassurance that you have some runway and some capital to be able to reinvest into the company is a really exciting step after such a long history to be able to kind of rebrand, relaunch, come up with this new platform. So I'm getting this right. When the company started, it was almost more of like a gaming studio, like an agency, kind of supporting the creation of VR games. And then it slowly started getting interest from enterprise. And then you realize that maybe the opportunity with enterprise is less of an agency model and more of a platform, like a software that you could license. What were the use cases that came up that made you think, okay, it's time to pivot from an agency to a platform? And kind of talk me through a little bit of the focus of the platform. Is it hard skills training, soft skills training, collaboration? Like where do you guys focus?
Yeah. So there was actually a few sort of like entry points to that. We've done quite a lot of like VR based training, hard skill training, both like assembly training for manufacturing, safety training, like how do you actually how should you behave when you land with a helicopter on an offshore platform, like oil and gas platform, stuff like that. We also did a sort of a collaborative learning environment for a bank where they did training inside VR. So they were training their sales personnel to try and like record and see how they actually used which arguments towards their customers, stuff like that. And then finally, we had a third customer that where we did a HoloLens-based remote support and sort of monitoring platform for them. And all three in parallel came to us and said, like, this is really cool. Like they see amazing value, but like the cost was quite high. So they asked us independently, like when we could offer something like this as a product that they could just subscribe to instead of like them being in charge of the development and being the only company sort of driving it forward. So it was sort of like those, like almost simultaneously, those three suggestions that led us to saying like, okay, there's definitely a need here.
Real quick before we get into the platform, when you because I just want to understand the journey a little bit. So you don't have to give a specific example of like one brand or project, but when you say it's like really costly, like it seems like the investment of custom building was the biggest blocker, that they were like, we want to do more of this, but it needs to be more scalable and cost effective. What does expensive mean in that use case? Like, are we talking 50 grand, 500 grand, $5 million? Like there's expensive means something different to everybody. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the scale of the price point that was scary. And then also maybe a little bit about the level of time investment that was required for something like that.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. And actually, like before that, it's something our CSO would love me to say. Like we started discussing like what's expensive versus what's a lot of money. Because like it's expensive if you don't feel you get the value out of it. But something can cost a lot of money. As long as you get the value out of it, there shouldn't be a problem, right? Something could cost $5 million, but if it led you to save 10 or 20 million, like it's not expensive, right? It's just a lot of money. So
I love
yeah,
that
just want to
framework.
mention that.
That's such a good way to separate the two concepts, right? It's
It
like
is. It is.
like
I think it's quite important because like software development can get like it can cost a lot of money. So you just want to really make sure that whatever you do, create at least like that much value and hopefully much more, right? So it doesn't end up being expensive for the end user. But yeah, like to give some examples, I would say like a usual or like a common sort of training application that we did. This was mainly for like manufacturing and oil and gas, renewable energies, stuff like that. So basically the same ICP that we have today. It would cost like somewhere between $100 and $200,000, right? So in that sort of vicinity, and it would be a development project of I would say like 3 to 4 months usually, depending on how much knowledge transfer there was initially, like how much we would have access to a subject matter expert that could really help us explain what we needed to do and like the details in the application. That was actually another thing that led us to actually wanting to build this platform, is to avoid that knowledge transfer, because like we're software developers, we're really good at what we do, but we don't know anything about how you assemble a pump or how you do maintenance of a offshore wind turbine, right? So enabling those subject matter experts to be able to create their own trainings has always been the dream, and why we actually started SynergyXR.
Yeah, I think when you think about VR platforms or VR services, like these programs in general, like they touch such a wide range of industries and use cases because, you know, it's as ubiquitous as video is, right? And like we use video to communicate training for everything. Like literally anyone could use a video call. And VR is the same. Like it's a medium of communication. It's a way for us to share ideas and tell stories, but you need to bridge that gap between I'm an amazing storyteller, like the same way that a guy's an amazing film director or cameraman. In VR, you've got amazing 3D designers and world builders and technologists, and those are one set of skills for delivery. But then the actual use case, the actual story that's being told, that needs to be from the knowledge of the actual people using the program and running the program, right? Like the actual guy on the manufacturing line that knows how to build a manufacturing line. Like that's essential to bridge that gap somehow. When you made the move to the platform and kind of trying to move out of services into providing a technology solution, how did that reduce the cost and scope? What was the way in which that would make it easier or more scalable for these brands to try these programs?
So I think again, there's little sort of detail to that answer as well, because like for us to build these very detailed trainings that we used to do as a complete custom project, we started building like 2 years ago. We built in a system into Synergy that enables us to create these trainings. But up until now, or up until our next release in October, we can talk about a bit more about that later as well. Like it's been something that we can do internally here at SynergyXR. So we still do sort of like professional services on top of the platform, and that of course adds a bit to the cost compared to when the day comes where the end user, where the subject matter expert themselves can create these trainings, right? But we've moved to something I would say like what would usually take like 3 to 4 months development that I mentioned before. It can usually now be done between like 4 to 6 weeks. And
which is huge. That's a huge difference, right? And I think this is a really common path that startups take is they start as a service. Like if you think what SaaS is, it's software as a service, right? So it's like you have a service offering, you build technology to enable your services to streamline and be able to provide those services more effectively. So you essentially become like a technology enabled agency.
Yeah.
And then the goal is you get that internal tool to be so powerful that eventually you can license it directly to your clients. And it's so easy that they can actually do it themselves. And so it's a journey, right? Like you can't just snap your fingers and solve these really massive problems overnight. Like it takes time.
Yeah, exactly. Also because like along the way, initially we were very much focused on making like a no code, like in-app drag and drop builder platform. You see a few of those like in the industry today, but like where you can just have your cloud backend where your users can upload content to, and they can just from within the app just spawn it in, start building sort of a static environment, and like have like we see a lot of companies of our clients today use that for like simpler sort of like onboarding type of use cases where you want to talk about your company's value chain or your mission statement, or like uh, learn some sort of some stuff about your products in a more interesting way than just reading a PDF or watching a video. And that can all be done in Synergy, and it can be done in other platforms as well. So where we want to differentiate ourselves is like when we go into the very like detail, like nuts and bolts, and like using tools and screwing things together, and like doing that very, very detailed, fully articulated training. So yeah, initially it was mainly focused on getting the backend up and running. All of the different clients, we've always had a vision of being sort of device agnostic. So we cover like the major standalone VR headsets, so from Meta and HTC and Pico, but also like Windows PC, Mac, iOS, iPad OS, the Apple Vision Pro. Like we sort of try to make SynergyXR as accessible as possible, because like we're still, even though things are really picking up and like hardware is getting better and better and cheaper, like it's still not sort of a commodity, right? When you hire a new employee, there will be a laptop, there will be a phone, but there will not be a headset necessarily yet. Like we will get there, I'm completely sure of that, but not yet. So making SynergyXR as a platform available on all these different platforms really makes it like much more accessible, much more scalable. So
I think it's one of the challenges in the industry. I just got back from AWE recently, and I'm not sure if your team had a chance to get out there this year, but
not this year, no.
it was big. I felt the momentum of the industry really coming to life. There were people really excited about it, and there were fun things. Like I get really excited about like the style of these big giraffes and chandeliers and stuff they had for the after parties. But the actual event, there was like a really tangible amount of conversations from real brands coming to check out the progress the industry is making. And one of the topics that kept coming up over and over again was this idea that we need a more standardized operating system, right? So like Meta OS has talked about opening up Meta OS. You've got Apple with Vision OS. You've got this kind of Android adjacent kind of model that's out. You've got Qualcomm with Snapdragon Spaces. Like there's a lot of these really powerful operating systems in the industry, but there's a lack of standardization, which makes it really difficult, because if you're a software developer, you've got to be building for a bunch of different operating systems. And when you're a small company trying to solve big problems, you only have so much bandwidth. And when you have to rebuild the same features 4 times, it extends your bandwidth. Like it makes it slower and harder. But the accessibility is important, right? Because there's just different pockets that prefer different devices for certain reasons. There's some people that prefer web-based experiences still, but want a taste of 3D. I think that's a good kind of segue into this talk about accessibility, right? So when we talk about virtual training, that could mean VR, that could mean 360 video, it could mean more immersive 3D experience on a desktop, on a screen. It could mean augmented reality, right? Like you mentioned earlier, those augmented reality kind of iPads and tablets and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So maybe talk me through where you think the line is on like when does it make sense to do VR training, and when does it make sense to stick to more like traditional mediums that might be like a 2D screen?
Yeah. I would say we always try and like advise against pushing everything into VR. Like it just like it doesn't make sense for everything, right? If you need to review a PDF doc or whatever with a colleague, like jump on a Teams call or Zoom or whatever, right? Like you don't need to run into VR for that. I would say like on our platform, since we cover sort of the whole spectrum, I would say as soon as you need to do something where the immersion provides extra value, as long as you have something like where you need to bring in a product, a three-dimensional product that you can like have a in-depth either like review session about or like discussion about, it makes sense. And especially when you want to like train like muscle memory based training, right? So when you actually have the natural interactions, you don't just sit around click with a mouse, like you actually reach out, grab stuff, you put stuff together, you build that muscle memory so you remember where everything is without even thinking about it. That's where it makes the most sense, right? Like on our platform, actually, most months it's being utilized just as much on a Windows PC than it is on a VR headset. So it's still that important to be on sort of, as you say, a more immersive 3D experience, but on a 2D screen that people are used to and have available and is accessible to them. And for a lot of use cases, it provides a lot of value, right? But for some, like especially those like really in-depth trainings where you want to really learn more than just see, you want to feel it, like that's where VR really just provides that extra level of value.
Yeah, I totally agree on like VR needs to offer something that you can't get without it, right?
Yeah.
Like there needs to be something there. And I think that's why traditionally hard skills, like to your point, talking about like muscle memory or like interacting with a 3D asset, those hard skills and then like design and prototyping were the earliest to be adopted, because even though you had to pay 750 grand for like a XR cave and like it's incredibly expensive, like to your point, a couple $100,000 to make a fully custom application to train your employees, that was the entry point. And you had to have an incredible ROI for it to be worth going into that entry point. And those hard skills and those design prototyping processes is where the highest ROI very often tends to be, where it's more worth the friction. But I think now there's this opportunity where like devices are getting much cheaper, right? Like $500 for a Quest 3 or, just over $1,000 for what Lenovo and HTC and some of these other companies have. It's really affordable, right? And like that's like an international plane ticket and you've paid for your headset right away. And then outside of the hardware, there's more developers now. There's more mature platforms. Like SynergyXR has been in the space a long time, right? Like there's companies that have been at this through these hype cycles and have built out very functional, very practical tools that can now scale. So I think that starts to open up more doors. And I'm wondering for you, have you felt any new use cases start to come up, or do you see any kind of emerging use cases now that the cost is really kind of coming down?
I would still like, we're very much focused on training, and that is because it's one of the like most well-proven use cases. Like there's been like surveys done and like different like in academia also, like the knowledge retention that is much better, and like you know all these stats everybody in the industry does. So it's very well documented that it works. It's just been too expensive and not accessible enough. So that's where we're focusing right now. But we also build a platform that is broad enough so it can be used for a lot of different stuff. Like we also had some fun customers that were somewhat outside our ICP, but that sort of wanted to dip their toes into immersive technologies. And instead of making a research or development project out of it, they could take a platform like ours and build it out and do some internal testing. Very much sort of a proof of concept, proof of value stage, but like the platform is broad enough to actually be used for that. We even had a use case at a hospital where initially it was mainly for when people came into the emergency room and they had like a very complex hip fracture, for example. They do a CT scan, and to be able to put together doctors and figure out how to best operate this, what they used to do, because it sped up a lot of things and gave them a lot of value, was to 3D print such a full hip. And that would take 52 hours of 3D printing, right? But that would give them an object, a 3D object, and they could pull together like 3 or 4 experts, and they could really figure out how to best operate and how to best help this patient. And we showed like with our platform, they could get that CT scan with a simple conversion, like within 10 minutes, they had it in a virtual experience. They could jump in there and do that same sort of review and do that same preparation for the operation that they used to have to wait 52 hours on. So
Such an impactful thing, right? So I
yeah.
love that you mentioned that, right? Because I talked a little bit about the headset prices and like development platforms being more scalable, but the biggest bottleneck is really the content, like being able
Yeah.
to get access to seeing something in 3D, and to do it physically. Like 3D printing something, waiting 52 hours is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like that's such a huge delay. If you can do a scan, get it into a 3D environment in VR, and be able to do that in 10 minutes, like I mean that's incredibly valuable, and you're more likely to get answers for patients faster, and there's a huge impact there, right? So that
Yeah.
I love that example. I want to make a little bit of a pivot here. I want to get into a little bit more of your story. So
Sure.
pretty much everyone we have on the show has been working in the space for a little while. It's people that are pretty experienced in VR, but I'm always really curious how that journey begins, right? Because the industry's still young enough to where if you've been
Yeah.
working in XR, not just starting today, but have been around it for years, like that means you're really, really early. Something happened that kind of caught your attention.
Yeah.
So maybe you could share, like, what was your first VR experience? How did you kind of stumble your way into working into this industry?
Yeah. So, yeah, probably going back to you mentioned in the beginning as well. I have a PhD in computer science, and it was it's a special thing here in Denmark that's called an industrial PhD, where it's a collaboration between a company and a university, where you're actually employed at the company. So you work like full time there, and then you just do a PhD on top of that. And I did this with Therma, the biggest defense company here in Denmark. And I was working on like in the modeling and simulation sort of landscape, doing quite math heavy modeling and simulation of some of their self-defense systems. And I quite early sort of realized, in order to get all the stakeholders on board, it was hard to just show the math and numbers and graphs. But when you could like use the model to sort of drive a 3D model of the environment of the aircraft and the flares that were dispensed and stuff like that, it's much easier for people to understand. So that was sort of the first time I started using like 3D rendering on top of the more math heavy modeling I did. And fast forward to like a little bit later on in the process while I was still employed at Therma. We had like an initiative for like it was called the Innovation Sandbox. So it was basically all employees had the opportunity to apply for a project that they found interesting and they found that could help out the company. And I actually had a colleague, I did not know him back then, but he was a mechanical engineer and he had seen AR and VR and just thought like, okay, Therma needs to get into this space. Like it's such amazing, like you have such expensive products and hard to reach. Like how many people get to sit in the cockpit of an F-16, right? Not a lot. So he applied for such a project, but he needed a technical sidekick to actually do the coding. And I heard about it and volunteered, said like, yeah, sure, I can do that. So I think actually the first real VR experience was something I did myself in the matter of a few hours. It was in the old like Google Cardboard, and it was something as simple as it was because Therma has a product that's called 3D audio. So like very precise spatial mapping of audio that helps the fighter pilots understand from where the missile is coming from, because it just cuts down on the reaction time. Instead of having to try and see it on a 2D screen, when they hear where it is, like it cuts like almost a second of the reaction time, which can be life and death in such a situation. So we did a very, very ultra simple VR experience where you were just sitting in, it wasn't even in a cockpit, and I just had like a sphere just like hovering around the head of the user, emitting a sound so you can hear the spatial audio. And that was actually what started sort of the journey in VR at Therma, because they had sometimes a bit of problems on like getting people to understand their product, right? And this was just so simple and powerful. I made it like in next to no time, right? So I think like an hour, something like that. So
This might be my favorite answer to that question. I've asked a lot of people about their first VR experience,
yeah,
and there's some really interesting patterns with it. Where a lot of people, it's like the Oculus DK1, and there's very often like a 360 video involved in it. But this story, there's a few things that stand out to me that make me really excited about it. One, the fact that you built the first time that you ever got in VR, like it was an experience that you created. That's got to be like a little bit magical, right? It's like you design something and then you enter this other universe almost that you created. Like that's very, very cool. And then the second piece that's really interesting to me is that it was focused on spatial audio.
Yeah.
So spatial audio, I think, is the most underrated function of virtual reality because vision is the number one sense that like we all focus on with VR because that's the point, right? It's like we're tricking your eyes to make you feel like you're in a 3D space and you get more context of a 3D object. You can look around it like that. That's where we put the vast majority of our attention in VR. But spatial audio is so incredibly interesting because we talk about what can you do in VR that you can't do in alternative meetings, in a video call or in real life. Spatial audio lets you have 20 people in a room be able to have multiple conversations simultaneously. It lets you absorb different content at the same time. Like the things you can do just by playing the sound is actually very interesting. So that's a very cool kind of first experience into VR. How did you end up starting with SynergyXR? So you mentioned that was, you kind of came on a little later in their journey, right? As it was getting closer to making this pivot into enterprise. What was the experience of joining the company?
Yeah, so actually myself and Daniel, the mechanical engineer that I mentioned, we spent the next like 14 months trying to convince everybody at Terma that they needed to like find some money in their development budget so we could actually make something real and not just a ultra quick prototype of something that was just more for fun, right? And it took that long until finally we got a project funded. We actually got like a project of 2 years we got, so we could work roughly half of my time was on that and half of my time was on my real job, as my boss used to call it. And I think that just my enthusiasm was just gone after that. Like that things had to take so long. It was just I just wanted to do this full time. I could see the benefits of it.
Did it take a long time because it was technically challenging, or did it take a long time because of like red tape and bureaucracy and just getting approvals for things?
Exactly. So everybody could see like everybody was enthusiastic. Everybody could see like, oh, that would be amazing that we could like show these and these products and these ways, but no one could find any money in their budgets, which was just
How did you go about navigating that? Because I think this is an interesting thing that a lot of companies struggle with, right? And it's interesting that you've had the opportunity to be on both sides of it. I think that's rare. A lot of companies are like just focused on trying to get the startup in the door and trying to enable their client to navigate these processes. But you've actually been in that seat trying to get approval internally, and now you're on the outside in the startup kind of coming and providing value. What was that process like for trying to get approvals? How'd you go about that?
We basically went around doing demos, and to be honest, it's much of the same life on both sides of that fence. Like you do a lot of demos, you try and impress a lot of people, you try and understand their pain points, or like where can I make a difference to you? So not just impress, but inform them, understand their pains, and try and talk about like how we can actually alleviate some of those pains. So we did that, and as I said, like everybody could see that there were some benefits to be had here, but no one could find the necessary funding. And I think it was also because it very quickly became such a like sort of a shared, like so different departments needed to pitch in order to get this rolling, and they wanted to make sure that they would get their money's worth, and like how would we prioritize tasks. So it was a lot of bureaucracy, and I think also a lot of like, we've never done this before, like, right? That was not what they usually did. They kept developing on existing projects. That's what the company used to do. And this would be something completely different, like giving new tools to marketing and sales to really explain what the products were about. And it was just not something that was already in the budgets. So I would say it's actually quite similar to some of the conversations we have today with large companies, where you need to be out in very good time, make sure that you help them understand the value and help identify where the biggest value add is, So we spent the time wisely, and then like have be patient enough, because budgets takes time before they actually go through. So it's not too different, I would say.
I think what's cool about this though is it gives you a lot of empathy for what your customers deal with, because you've
Yeah,
literally been in the seat and had to go through it. So I think it's easy for especially more like green sales guys that are on those front lines all the time, like to just be like, oh, what, you seriously couldn't get this budget? They had such a great call, like they love the demo, the use case is great. But the reality is, like, there is a very complicated process to get
yeah,
enterprise programs off the ground, especially if you're talking about new innovative technologies that are not
exactly.
already earmarked in the budget.
Yeah.
So the role for us when we're on those kind of sales side of things is like to be buyer enablers, right? Like we need
Mm.
to help the people that are excited about it and support them in how they tell that story, because
Yeah.
they're also exploring probably 20 different tools for 20 different things, and like you need to be able to help them tell your story that they're
Mm.
not an expert in. They're not doing 20 demos a day talking about your product all the time with every business in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, I think sales is making a big shift. And I know you're more on the technology side, but I think when we kind of support these sales or these buying committees, it's almost like project management. Like the
Yeah.
sales rep needs to do more than just give a good demo. They need to be really organized and great with follow up and good at kind of coordinating those next steps.
Yeah.
I think this is a good segue into your role, though, right? So you're the CTO at SynergyXR, so you're kind of heading up the technology side of the organization. Talk me through a little bit about what that role actually is. Like what does your day to day look like as the CTO at Synergy?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say also again, like a lot of credit to our CSO, but like we say, and we actually mean it, that everybody at SynergyXR is in sales. We just have different roles. So like everybody should be thinking sales, and everybody should be thinking about value creation for our companies, or for our customers, right? Like how can we, so the engineer, like what I'm building right now should be something that will create value for our customers in the end. Um, I'm not that directly involved in a lot of sales anymore. I used to be very involved, but yeah, today I'm mainly leading the engineering team. We are 10 people, like the company is 30 people in total. So one third of that is my engineering team. So we're still quite a heavy tech engineering company. Um, but yeah, and we do everything in the engine room. So we build the platform as such. And then we have a different department called professional services that build experiences on top of the platform, right? So that's how we sort of separate those concerns. Um, and what I do on a day-to-day basis, it differs a lot. There's a lot of planning and management, like project management. I have a tech lead that helps me out a lot on that, certainly. But like planning the next release, coordinating between like who's doing what, making sure that yeah we meet our deadlines, stuff like that. There's a lot of low practical stuff like that. I'm still involved in sales, especially with a lot of like IT security assessment work. So I'm being pulled in for the more technical customers, either if they have some very specific technical questions about the platform or the security behind it, but also just like in the normal procurement process, I'm always involved at some point, even though we try to help out sales with having like IT security white papers written and everything is just ready to hand out. Sometimes you just still need to show up and talk to the customer and make them feel, okay, these guys know what they're doing. That's fine. So that takes up a bit of my time as well. Right now, we are sort of redoing our entire like information security management system, so getting everything up to snuff, like with all the different policies and stuff like that, which I'm very heavily involved in, a little bit too much if you ask me, but it has to be done. So looking forward to getting that done here over the summer. So yeah, I'm very much involved in fundraising as well. It's definitely spearheaded by our CEO, Mass, who's doing the brunt of the work, but I'm usually his sidekick in most of the meetings. So we meet up with both like with the commercial and mission sort of person and the more technical person, so we can make sure that the investors understand what we're actually building.
Yeah, it's essential, right? And like all of these conversations, like you're talking about selling or raising funding for a
Yeah,
technology company, and so
yeah,
the technology and the person running the technology side of the organization is pretty key. Like, how are you thinking about things and your ability to help them understand how you're building? And I could imagine it's pretty challenging when when you're a younger company, which is where my whole background is. Like all my experience has mostly been like the first, second sales guy in the room, in very small
mm,
companies selling to big companies, and it's tricky because the technology changes a lot, right?
yeah,
Like you're constantly updating new features and you're improving, getting more compliance levels and higher security, and you're kind of constantly pushing those boundaries. So it's not as simple as just here's a white paper and go say all this stuff to the sales guys. A lot of the time you have to kind of update those on an ongoing basis, or if it's a really high profile client or an investor, it's going to require some custom documentation or custom
yeah,
conversation to help people get up to speed. One of the things I always like to ask leaders that are kind of on the executive teams is, what are the metrics that you track? Like, what are some numbers that you look at either on a daily basis or maybe on like a monthly or a quarterly basis?
yeah. So like I always track our app analytics. That's I can't help myself. That's on a daily basis just to figure out like what happened the last 24 hours. Like both like active users, utilization, if there should happen to be a crash, like what happened from where in the world, stuff like that. It's just yeah, it's one of the first things I do when I get in the morning, just to get sort of just take the pulse on the live product. Um, Apart from that, like checking our DevOps, like our progress on the current sprint, like just to see how things are going. We have daily stand-ups, like we use a modified version of Scrum here and have done for years. So always meet up with the team there and get the latest status and just make sure that, like I see my main role as being an enabler, making sure that the right people talk together. Unfortunately, it's been a long time since I've written any code. Like we have some brilliant engineers that does that. So I just want to make sure that I can sort of pick up on those like important details and make sure that people coordinate correctly. So I see that as sort of my main point. And then of course, like at least on a monthly basis, like we have weekly management meetings where we take up like how sales is going, and every month we have like a common status of like the last month, sort of more financial metrics. So of course that is sort of very important, no matter if you're bootstrapped or a VC company, a VC backed company. So yeah,
Always, yeah. It's at the end of the day, business is business, right? Like
yeah,
it's got to be making money. But one thing I really like about how you've framed your role and kind of how the company thinks about things is this like customer centric. Like, how are we building to add value? How can we work with sales? Like that's a
mm,
really important thing. Like, you need product and sales, and I want to go bigger than sales and marketing, right? Like, you want revenue teams and product teams to be very aligned.
yeah,
There needs to be this feedback loop where the folks that are customer facing and controlling positioning can provide feedback to product, and then product can provide
yeah,
direction and kind of like guidance on where the product's going and the vision and how far away that vision is, so that the front lines can properly talk about it too. And it's this
yeah.
constant kind of feedback loop. What are some of the
I think
things
it's
you guys
funny
do in?
actually. Oh, sorry, just to interrupt, but like we have some tooling in place for actually providing feedback, and usually I'm sort of the glue between the commercial and the product side. But we actually some of my engineers asked me if we could have like a meeting just from time to time with sales. So we set it up actually now. We have once a month. We sit down like the entire sales department and the entire engineering department sit down and like either just go through some potential deals that went well, and maybe some potential deals that did not go so well. Maybe we have some difficulties in the product that we need to make sure that sales understands and stuff like that. So it's very down to earth. There's no real agenda, but like just to make sure that these people sit in the same room and really feel that they're on the same team. So that's a recurring meeting now every month, and everybody's really happy about it because you're right. Like it's so important that this is aligned. So
And I think it often gets overlooked.
yeah,
But I love the fact that you actually set up like I know everyone hates having more meetings on their calendar, but I think this is one of
yeah,
those meetings that like has a purpose, right?
yeah,
Um, I talk about this a lot, but it's like we're living in a world where we have so many asynchronous tools that let us pass batons in the cloud and be able to get something done. Someone else leaves comments, and even across different time zones, we can be collaborating on this kind of rolling basis. But then when we do meet together, when we do have something on the calendar, then what do we do with that? Why are we having that meeting? We have to be really intentional about that time so that we can get the most out of it. And I think what you just described, like creating a feedback loop across different departments and giving an opportunity to share feedback in both directions, is a great example of a very intentional meeting. And I like
yeah,
that it's not like daily or weekly. Like I think monthly gives you enough time for like
yeah,
actual updates to be made, new features to come out, or new deals to win and lose. And I think you
exactly.
need to let it breathe a little bit. If you do it
Yeah,
too much, it feels like a waste.
yeah,
Something I'm always curious about with XR teams is, this is a drum that I beat selfishly, is like I think every XR team needs to be meeting an XR much more
hmm
frequently. Um, I'm guessing there's still a fair amount of video calls. There always is, but does your team have any sort of either XR collaboration that you do internally, or XR games for culture building, or XR client presentations? Like, do you guys do any of your actual meetings in virtual reality?
yeah. So I would say most client meetings has a live demo in it because we just enjoy showing our product off, and it also like it sort of just shows what you have instead of just talking about it, right? So we do a lot in that, and because our pro service team is building on top of Synergy, like you see, like people are constantly in and trying out stuff in Synergy, and like project managers, or I'm being asked to just quickly review something, and because SynergyXR is just like, we don't see SynergyXR as a collaboration platform, uh, but like it has of course built-in multi-user. It's just sort of part of the foundation. We don't see it like it's not. You don't go in there to collaborate. You go in there into work, and that's what we do. We collaborate with people when we work. So it's just sort of more an underlying statement more than it is a feature for us. And that makes it easy. Like also during development of training procedures, we can invite in a client and see sort of a work in progress version of the training we're building to them, and like annotate in 3D space whatever they have for input, stuff like that. So we do that a lot because it's so much more impactful than trying to hand like documents back and forth with screenshots and trying to annotate like that. I think like we have the occasional Beat Saber contest as well, but actually now you mention it, I don't think we do enough like sort of more recreational VR. We should. I know like a lot of the guys play a lot of VR games in their free time, so we definitely should do more of that. Well, I think that's a takeaway from me. Um,
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile, and I'm glad to
it,
hear that you like use leverage your own tool, and
mm,
do a lot of meetings either in there with clients and internally, because I think that there's a problem with young companies where they don't dog food enough.
yeah.
We like to say sip our own champagne at Arthur. I think it's the European side of the company. It brings that little bit of class to what we're doing, but I I think that if you're going to tell the world, we believe that this is where the world is going and that this change is valuable, like we have to participate in that ourselves. And frankly, I think it makes it easier for us internally to believe in it because we feel the value. Like it's
Yeah,
something that over time, like you actually feel the benefits of what you're talking about instead of it just being this hypothetical pitch, right? And I think that
yeah,
makes a big difference.
yeah,
With VR, there's a little bit of maturity now, right? Like there's some companies that have some VR training already. A lot of people might have a kid who has a headset. Maybe they've tried Beat Saber or something once or twice. But there's still a lot of people that have never used VR before. And especially if you're talking about training, maybe the moderator is a little bit experienced, but the rest of the team, it's like first time ever putting on a headset.
yeah.
When you think about designing for new users versus experienced users, how important is like UI user experience compared to like the actual functionality or like the architecture of the platform?
I think it's incredibly important, and like we always try and design for simplicity, because like for stuff to really penetrate companies and be used, it needs to be simple. Like it needs to be. I usually say you shouldn't be trained to use VR, right? You shouldn't require training to use VR. You should use VR to get trained, and not the other way around, right? So we try to make it very easy, and sometimes we also get like feature requests of like, why don't you utilize more of the buttons on the controllers and stuff like that? You could just do some clever key combinations, and you can do a lot of shortcuts. It's just like, yeah, but like right now, sometimes we still struggle with getting people to hold the controllers right. Like sometimes they flip them around, and like it's weird things happen during demos, right? So I think really emphasizing simplicity.
Well, just think about keyboards, right? Like
Yeah,
keyboards on a computer, we take it for granted. Like we all work with computers so frequently, but look, I remember in elementary school, we had a class that was it was type to learn. And it was a
yeah,
bunch of keyboard games
yeah,
where like you would learn how to type the certain keys and set your hands on the keyboard in the right way. And nobody knew how to type very well. So a lot of people wanted to do this with their two fingers, right? Like it wasn't this natural thing to just set your
yeah,
hands on a keyboard and start typing.
yeah,
And we literally do that in a standardized way across all of our public schools and kind of creating that education at a very young age.
mm,
With VR controllers, we don't. And there's a younger generation that's experienced a lot of video games and probably had access to console games. But the older generations who are approving these budgets and building these programs, it's easy to forget, but a lot of these folks, like maybe Atari or like Pong or like arcade games, is more what video games were for them. They
yeah,
didn't necessarily have a controller in their hand growing up. So it's not intuitive. It's a
mm,
totally new way of doing things.
yeah.
What's your take on controllers versus hand tracking? Do you think that hand tracking is the future? Or do you think that we'll always have controllers?
I'd like to start just saying today, I feel like I really want to try to avoid having to learn people, and I know you still need to learn them. Like you if you grab, you need to grab down here on the control. Like you need to tell them that, right? But at least like from a programmatical point of view, a button is either clicked or it's not. Whereas with camera-based hand tracking, if you accidentally occlude your fingers and like people start dropping stuff that they thought they had grabbed, and like they start having to battling the interaction system, that can cause just as much as friction than just learning which buttons to press. You ask about the future, and I would say, yeah, of course it is. Because that's where we're trying to go with like spatial computing. Just jumping on the Apple bandwagon here, is you mentioned keyboard and mouse. Like for some odd reason, that has just sort of been the de facto way of interacting with a 2D screen with some digital content. Like the mouse was invented like what 60 years ago. I think it was like in 1960 or something like that. And whereas people have been used to like you grab stuff like this, you move it around. We've been doing that ever since we started walking upright. So of course it's more natural, like seen from an evolutionary perspective. And I think like hand tracking has become so much better. Like I still remember what was it called? The Leap Motion, the controllers you can put on top of the old PC hardware. Like before they updated the SDK, like it was horrible, and then they updated that, and it was much better. And what these manufacturers are now able to do just from camera-based tracking is amazing, right? So yeah, definitely it's the way forward. Today I mentioned we support the Apple Vision Pro, so that was our first time where we needed to get away from controllers because there were none. So we actually did implement all of the hand tracking for Apple Vision Pro, which also makes it easier for us to transition on the other hand tracking capable headsets. So I think you should expect to see it at SynergyXR in a future not too far away. But yeah, right now it's mainly on the Apple Vision Pro only on the Apple Vision Pro that we support hand tracking. But I do think it's the future. It's becoming so good, and it is a more natural type of interaction. So yeah,
Yeah, I think this idea of just this new interface is interesting. It's definitely in like an explorational phase, like this
yeah,
idea of do we use eye tracking, do we don't? Do we use hand tracking? How do we make hand tracking better?
Mm.
It seems really interesting though, because I agree. I think we've been using keyboards and mouse for so long that it just feels like the thing that's natural. But
Mm.
it's only natural because we literally ingrain it into society and kind of coach
Yeah.
people into it. It's not natural because it's intuitive. So I think this opportunity to create a new, much more natural interface is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And similarly, when people talk about like generative AI or all these different AI tools, like I have this, and we won't go too far into this, but I have this feeling that 3D spatial interfaces will be a much more productive way for humans
Mm.
and AI to interact with each other. I think robots are getting a lot better, but they're still super expensive. It's much easier to have an AI assistant in an AR or a VR format than to have a physical robot in every person's home.
Yeah.
And to communicate with them organically and naturally, I feel like conversational and being able to have access to seeing the things I see, like with what Meta's doing with the Ray-Ban glasses,
Mm.
makes much more sense to me than just chatbots that we text all day. So I
True.
think there's something there that's going to continue to be very interesting.
Yeah, and I
Um,
also think that there is an interesting topic there because we're still guilty, or we're guilty ourselves about this. But you see a lot of UI in VR. It's still 2D. Like you just bring it into a 3D world, right? Make it world space, but it's still 2D buttons you press, stuff like that. And I think there's also some really interesting innovation that's going to happen there because like if you just know, like instead of going to a sub menu to find your pen to start drawing, if you just know it's on your right hip, right, you can just instantly like, and it's so natural when you start learning stuff like that. So I think that's also where we will see a lot of innovation in the coming years, making stuff not like menus and search fields, but making it spatial. So you just know like, okay, I need a new training scenario. I just go to like the virtual 3D object over here and I pull out the right training and it's getting loaded or whatever instead of like having to browse menus.
I
That's
think
certainly something that we would like to explore much more because I think it would provide a much more intuitive user interface.
that's a really good point. I think some things will work better in 2D though, and some
Mm.
things work better in 3D. So humans have gotten really, really good at reading 2D charts and interacting in 2D interfaces. And also some 3D things are just like overkill, right? So I always
Yeah.
use the same example. I'm like, if I want a digital twin of like a car, that's really useful to me, right? Because if I want to buy a car, it's really expensive and want to spend time looking at all the different angles. It's really hard to get me in front of that car. Like if I could do it from my computer, that's really helpful for me. But if I want a burrito from Chipotle, I don't know if DoorDash needs to put in a digital twin of a Chipotle and have me go through a full burrito configurator. Be kind of cool and maybe a good marketing tactic if you just want to get a lot of eyeballs or something, but it's maybe not that useful to me as an
No.
end user, right? So I think some things having a 2D interface are actually much easier to navigate
Yeah.
and kind of get through, like a map that folds out versus a globe. Like they each have
Mm.
kind of two different use cases.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Like I love the pen anecdote because there's certain things that are like table stakes features. They're tools that all of us use and have in our toolkit when it comes to
Mm.
VR. It doesn't matter if you're doing training or workplace collaboration or client presentations, right? Like all of these use cases have a few things that are like table stakes features.
Yeah.
One example in Arthur is like we have a watch.
Mm.
If you want to know what time it is, you don't need to put a clock in the office. You just look at your left wrist and you've got the time listed there, right? And I think that's this idea of like what's a 3D widget that can just
Mm.
exist somehow in a way that's standardized across all these tools. What do those design principles become?
Yeah.
Because if all of us put the pen on the hip or all of us have a context menu on our wrist or something, if it's all there for all these different tools, then it becomes intuitive because people try
Mm.
one tool then another and they always know where to look. The same way how when you look at SaaS tools in 2D, all their nav bars are moving to the left side or they're at the top, right? Like there's always this, I know where to look to find it before I've even used your tool before, because the whole industry has these standard practices.
Yeah.
So I think that's the maturity we need to get to right now is like, how do we start to align on what the best design principles are
Yeah.
and get some consistency across the industry? And that's starting to happen slowly. Like we're seeing some
It
patterns.
is. It
but it's
is, but
very early still.
yeah, and I also talk to my engineers about that, and our designers that like, of course we should look at like other sort of similar products in the field. We should also play recreational games because a lot of cool stuff is happening there that you could easily like transform into a business, like just the interface, the interactions and stuff like that. There's a lot to learn from there as well. But from time to time, we also need to be brave enough to just realize that we are still in a not completely mature industry. So there are no like set design rules where stuff just needs to be like this. So we need to be sort of brave enough to help set that standard and try out some stuff that might be a little bit different than what some of the others do. But if we truly feel like, so a good example, we just finished an industrial PhD project here at SynergyXR actually. So one of our employees had the ambition to do a PhD, and it's been in sort of animation authoring, so animating objects, so both like through motion paths, but also doing like automatically creating exploded view animations of complex objects. And one thing we very like from the beginning we agreed on is we don't just want to pull in a 2D animation timeline so you could do it in VR. Like, because then you might as well just stay on your computer and do the animation and bring it into VR. So we wanted to make sure that it needed to be different than that. So we've done like motion path animations where you just take an object, you press record, and you do the path you want it to have, and you'll get like sort of a spline with some control points, so you can then change that afterwards and stuff like that. And also the same with the exploded view animations. Like sometimes it would actually be easier to pull in that 2D interface and help out the user, but we wanted to make sure, also since it was research, that we did not fall into that trap and really try to explore the immersive 3D world and like what spatial computing could actually bring to this workflow. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the creative experiments are so essential. Like I was a film guy before I got into VR. I was a filmmaker back in college, and I spent all my first commission checks in sales, funding student films and indie films and stuff. And that was like my whole background for a long time.
Cool.
And so I geek out about the film industry, and something that I love is a parallel to this. And I took this from, there's two conversations where it came up with Mo Husseini from Gen City Labs, and with Adam Kyle Wilson from Polyform Studio, where we talked about design principles and new mediums, and specifically with television broadcast. So this idea that like we basically just took plays and put them on the stage and had a camera facing the play. And then slowly people realized you could have two cameras and you could cut back and forth, and you could put a camera right in someone's face and it could be intimate. But here's an example I haven't talked about before on the pod that I think is also very interesting, is you think about movies like Home Alone that almost didn't get made, right? Like the budget was super, super tight. Like that whole house was actually recreated in a high school gym. Like they almost ran out of money consistently. And it's one of the most iconic movies of all time that almost did not exist. A big problem they had to deal with is the stuntmen that played the bad guys in Home Alone, where the kids always throwing these pranks and like these bad guys are getting hurt throughout the whole movie. Those are real stuntmen that have to fall on concrete, and they're doing these really sketchy stunts. This is not high-end visual effects. And so they really were concerned about the health of the stuntmen, and that if they did these stunts too many times, they were going to start really hurting these people. So they came up with a clever solution where they got a really crappy, cheap camera, like a really small kind of scrappy camera. And they were like, we just need an extra angle to try and make sure we have something usable, so we can do less takes and not hurt these people. But what ended up happening, because they had that side camera, is they got some really weird shots. Like there's a shot when the kid drops an iron down a chute and then it hits the guy in the head. The way they got that shot is they were like, we have this crappy little camera. Let's just drop it down the chute. Let's just see what happens. Like it doesn't matter if it breaks. It's a cheap camera, and like it's small enough to fit and fall. And then they get this incredible shot of the visual falling down the chute and landing right on the guy's face, and the camera literally hits this guy in the head, right? Incredible. But that only happens because of really creative experimentation. And then future filmmakers can look back at that and go, whoa, what if we had kind of a sloppy camera off to the side? What can we do creatively with that? And Then you start getting things like GoPros, and like everything starts to build on the past, and you get more and more creative ideas, some of which get adopted and become standard, and some of which remain kind of obscure creative ideas. But you never get there if you don't try and get clever and kind of think of the solution. And in VR, I think you're absolutely right. We need to be thinking that way. Like, we need to be considering what clever things can we bring in that might create really interesting results for our customers and for our teams.
And get inspired from places that like shouldn't be afraid. Like, even though we try to really be like very mature about our product, and like it's very much focused on like enterprise, so it needs to be serious, right? It's not fun and games, but you can still be inspired by games and their interaction models and what they do. Like, and I think we definitely all should do that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think video games, movies, like we're at the end of the day, we're telling stories and communicating. And there's a lot of areas, even going back to like cave paintings and fire, like it's amazing where you could pull interesting ideas. We're kind of coming right up on time. So I think it's probably a good time to wrap up, but I want to give you a chance. Is there any kind of upcoming work that Synergy is working on, or where can people find you? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it briefly. Like right now, we're working really hard on this, what we call a procedure builder. It's a tool within SynergyXR, initially only available for PC, because we still, funnily enough, see this as very much as a keyboard and mouse kind of task. But to build these very detailed training experiences on the SynergyXR platform. So basically enabling you to do everything. So we're going away from the sort of SDK kind of approach, Unity editor extensions, and building it completely as a tool inside SynergyXR. So you don't need to understand rigid bodies or collisions in order to create this tool or create these trainings with this tool. We're working really hard on that. Right now, we're looking at a release date in October. We'll start to do some internal testing with some of our most trusted customers after the summer holiday that's coming up here in Denmark. So it's shaping up to be really, really interesting. I have not seen anything like it in the market. We've seen some really good attempts at like Unity editor extensions, but still requiring you to both have the Unity license, which of course is, well, not cheap, let's be honest, but also it requires you to have some Unity knowledge. Sure, it's no code, you don't have to write any C# code, but still you need to understand the engine to build these trainings. So we're getting away from all that and making it like a true in-app, no-code, drag and drop kind of tool. So we're really excited when we can share more about that. We had a webinar with I think we had 39 companies, not 25 companies, but 39 participants. And people were blown away from what we could show them already. And this was a month ago. So really looking forward to that. So that's the main thing that keeps me awake at night, is to make sure that we really deliver on this, because there's so much potential in a tool like this. So that's mainly what you should be looking out for from SynergyXR. And if you want to follow us, like, we're very active on LinkedIn. We have an amazing marketing team and videographer. So we put a lot of pride in the video material and general content that we put out. So go follow us on our SynergyXR profile, and you can look me up. You're welcome to connect. Sune Wolff on LinkedIn as well. Otherwise, check out our website, SynergyXR.com. I think that should cover most bases.
Fantastic. Yeah, anything that makes publishing these experiences and content easier, I think, is a good thing, a net positive for everyone in the industry.
Yeah.
We'll throw those links down in the description so they're easy to find, but otherwise that's the pod.